Welcome to the Dyslexia Mom Life Podcast, your go-to podcast for dyslexia education and community. As moms, we want the best for our children, and when you're raising a child with dyslexia, that journey comes with unique twists and turns. Each week, we dive into dyslexia topics along with episodes on how to thrive in your dyslexia season as a mom, all with the goal of helping your child and your family thrive. Tune in for conversations that will inspire, inform, and connect you with a community that truly understands. You are not alone. We're in this together. Subscribe now and join in the conversation and community. You got this. Have you ever searched dyslexia in Google to find so many results that you're not sure where to begin and who to trust? And what about social media? Do you follow accounts that share information about dyslexia? We're going to dive into those topics today. Welcome to the Dyslexia Mom Life Podcast, where we tackle the real and raw aspects of motherhood and raising children with dyslexia. I'm your host, Nicole Holcomb, and today I'm sharing 10 frequently asked questions about dyslexia. So let's start with the first question. The first question that's often asked is, what is dyslexia? So dyslexia is a neurodevelopmental disorder that primarily affects reading and language processing. It impacts a person's ability to read, write, spell, but it does not affect someone's overall intelligence. Question number 2. What are the early signs of dyslexia in children? The early signs may include delayed speech development, difficulty learning the alphabet or recognizing letters, trouble rhyming, and difficulty learning the sounds associated with letters. The best resource for you to find signs of dyslexia by age groups is the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, and also Dr. Shaywitz's book, Overcoming Dyslexia. She has in both locations, on the internet and in her book, a list of different signs of dyslexia by age groups, starting with preschool all the way up through adulthood. And so she will bullet point list of several of those, and they're very helpful. I'll provide a link in the podcast description to both if you want to check those out. And the third most frequently asked question is, how is dyslexia diagnosed? Dyslexia is usually diagnosed through a comprehensive evaluation by an educational psychologist or a specialist. The assessment includes testing reading, spelling, writing, and sometimes cognitive skills like memory and processing speed. There are many free screeners for dyslexia too, and the screeners help identify signs of dyslexia and recommend further testing. You may have heard your child has to be in 3rd grade or older to test for dyslexia. That simply is not true. These screeners work as early as preschool and kindergarten. The International Dyslexia Association has a free screener on their website. That screener is based on the Colorado Learning Disabilities Questionnaire, and it is a screening tool designed to measure the risk of reading disability, like dyslexia, in school-age children. It's a very quick test that you could take online, and it asks simply 6 questions. 1. Does your child have difficulty spelling? 2. Has or had difficulty learning letter names? 3. Has or had difficulty learning phonics, which is sounding out words? 4. Does the child read slowly? 5. Does the child read below grade level? And 6. Does the student or child require extra help in school because of problems in reading and spelling? So they ask these questions on what we call a Likert scale. So it's never, not at all the way to always, and a great deal of time. And then in the middle, we have sometimes, frequently, rarely. So you'll see that there's a balance there as to what you're answering for each question. Once you answer those questions, it will give you a result as far as a recommendation. Frequently asked question number 4. What causes dyslexia? Dyslexia is believed to be genetic, and it does run in families. It results from differences in how the brain processes language, particularly in the areas related to reading and phonological awareness. Many times you'll see siblings with dyslexia, and many times if you think back to your own struggles or your child's other parent struggles with reading and those pieces associated with just struggling in school because of reading. Sometimes it might be a grandparent as well, but we have found that, especially with the specialized schools here in Atlanta, a lot of times in the dyslexia schools, there's many here that have schools specifically to remediate dyslexia. You will find many siblings also attending the school. Once parents know what to look for, they oftentimes are identifying their students early on and providing early intervention. Number 5, do children with dyslexia see and write letters and words backwards? This is a myth, and unfortunately many people believe this. I have to say, when I first got introduced to dyslexia myself, that was my first thought, was that students read or children read. Really, I was thinking of it from the standpoint of writing letters backwards, because we were seeing some of that, and some of that at the time in first grade in kindergarten was developmentally appropriate as they learned to write. But as we continue to see that and some other aspects that she was struggling with, we realized that maybe something different. And that's when we realized there was this whole world of dyslexia. And so we were able to learn more from that. But in fact, most children, though, with dyslexia, they don't reverse their letters. Again, that's more of a developmental piece that some students go through. That by itself is not a sign of dyslexia, but you may see that associated with. But that is not, for many people that don't know what dyslexia is, that is what we think, right? And again, early stages, we thought the same thing. Dyslexia is when children see and write letters and words backwards. And that's just not the end of it, right? Like, there's so much more to dyslexia. Question 6, can dyslexia be cured? Dyslexia is a lifelong condition, but with early intervention and appropriate support, individuals can significantly improve reading and writing skills. There is no cure, but effective teaching strategies can make a huge difference for your child to be able to read and be successful in school, and really in life. Early intervention is the key there. Question number 7, how can parents help a child with dyslexia at home? Parents can support their child by reading together, offering encouragement, and practicing phonological activities. Using audiobooks are a huge help as your child is learning to read. And a lot of people think that using audiobooks is really cheating. It's not real reading, but I completely disagree. Along the way, it gives your child confidence in hearing the vocabulary, learning words and context, and audiobooks can be a huge help. Many audiobooks, too, will have a read-along where it actually highlights the text if the student wants to follow along in a text as well. So assistive technology is also really, it's amazing now that we have all this technology and our students can really benefit from that. So text-to-speech software, where they're reading the text to your child, and as your child gets older and they need help with writing, they're able to speak, and then it will actually speech to write, and it will write it for the child. So not only is just providing that opportunity for assistive technology, reading, having an opportunity to listen to audiobooks, but another way you can help at home is just becoming more familiar with dyslexia. So listening to podcasts like this, reading resources that are, there are lots of great resources out there from the International Dyslexia Association. There's just many different resources that we share on this podcast. So one also is becoming familiar with dyslexia, but also the more important piece is becoming familiar with your child's individual learning profile. Not every dyslexic is the same. Actually, they're not. Everybody has their own uniqueness about them, what their strengths are, but also where they struggle. Is their dyslexia severe? Is it just a mild piece of dyslexia? And we're not going to get into all those pieces today, but the more severe the dyslexia is, the more the remediation might look a little different, may take more time, may be more intensive as far as the hours in the week. It may lead you to a dyslexia school like it did us. It just really depends on those pieces. But it's important for you to know your own child's learning profile, and you can find a lot of that through the testing that you do when your child is identified with dyslexia. It will really give you the ideas and the information that you need as it relates to the specific areas of weakness and then the specific areas of strengths, so that you are aware of your whole child's learning profile and can provide support where you need to. Frequently asked question number 8. What types of intervention or programs are most effective for dyslexic students? Well, evidence-based interventions such as Orton-Gillingham, Wilson Reading System, and other structured literacy programs, that emphasize phonics, multisensory learning, and individualized instruction are highly effective. So many times you'll find schools using these programs, and then sometimes you'll find, depending on where you live, if your school is not using these structured literacy programs inside the school, you may have to reach out to an actual reading specialist, someone outside of the school that provides tutoring in these areas that have been trained to specifically provide these structured literacy pieces, so that way that your child can learn to read and learn, and they're really learning how to kind of take these words apart from a phonics standpoint and understand the sounds of the letters and how to put those back together. And so the structured literacy piece really helps, especially with the multisensory learning that goes along with that. So it gets their brain firing as well and thinking through those things. So it's very important as you think about the interventions and programs that are needed for your child based on what we talked about a moment ago, which is that specific learning profile for your child as to what they need, where are their weaknesses, where do they need interventions. That piece will help determine what interventions you need and what programs that you need and whether or not your schools provide those and what specifically you might need for your child. Okay, let's move on to question number 9. Is dyslexia linked to ADHD or other learning disabilities? Dyslexia often does have co-occurrences with other conditions like ADHD or dysgraphia, which is difficulty with writing. This is also known as comorbidity, where individuals may have more than one learning difference. I like to call this the dyslexic sisters. So if you look back in previous episodes where I've talked about co-occurrences or I've talked about dyslexic sisters, this is what I'm talking about, because many times you'll have other people in the car with you, right? So the dyslexia may be driving, or the dyslexia might be in the back seat because maybe first you're having to deal with maybe a speech concern, maybe you're dealing with severe anxiety, and you've got to get that kind of underway first and kind of a little bit more managed, and before you can jump into some of the interventions with dyslexia. So again, that learning profile is going to help a lot to drive what do we need to address. And I will tell you too, as you go through your journey with dyslexia, you may be going through the intervention pieces and you feel like you're making a lot of progress, and then you'll feel like there's a detour or there's something that's been stalled. And why are we stalled and not making progress? Sometimes you're not making progress, your child's not making progress because one of these other learning differences is trying to drive. And so they're getting ahead of the dyslexia. And so you may have to stop and do some additional pieces. For example, it is not uncommon for a student to have speech services at the same time that they have interventions for dyslexia. So a child may have a speech session, and then in addition to that, will have their dyslexia tutoring as well. Some people say they can do both, but they really are two separate skill sets, again, depending on what the individual need of your child is. So it's always helpful to know that, because sometimes you are, a little bit relieved to know, okay, now we finally know what's going on, why they're struggling. And once you get the identification of dyslexia, you're like, okay, good. Now, how do I conquer this? How do I get past this? How do I help my child? And many times we start working on that one piece, and then these other pieces may pop in with the ADHD, ADD, anxiety, speech, math. Sometimes students struggle with math with dyslexia, with writing, executive functioning, which is really, keeping things organized. If your child has things all over the place, it could be some of it is executive functioning, that giving them multiple steps to do is too overwhelming for their brain. So they need it in what I call kind of chunks, right? So you say first, go bring all the clothes out of your room downstairs. And they're like, okay, I'll bring them downstairs. If you give them multiple steps, just go clean your room, that may be too much. They may not be able to really piece those pieces apart to know what it is that you're asking them to do. So some students struggle with that executive functioning. And in schools, many times they'll teach them how to best use those executive functioning skills as it relates to studying and getting organized and helping them keep their notebooks organized and their lockers clean. And there's some specific strategies around that many people offer for executive functioning pieces. So again, many things will come with dyslexia. So just knowing that will also not derail you as a parent, because you can expect that something else may pop up, and that's okay. Like, how do we address that? How do we continue to move the needle? How do we continue to help our child feel successful? But I think when you know up front, it is very helpful to not get so overwhelmed. And question number 10, that is our frequently asked question, is, are schools required to provide accommodations for dyslexic students? So if your student qualifies for an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, under the what they call IDEA, which is Individuals with Disability Education Act, and that IEP team recommends accommodations, then the school must provide them. So the first step in that is having that identification, that diagnosis of dyslexia. And sometimes you'll see it in some states as a specific learning disability in reading. They won't call it dyslexia. Lots and lots of legislation around that to try to get states to recognize that the learning difference or disability, however you want to categorize that, is actually dyslexia. So I know for us in Georgia at the time our daughter was identified, it was a specific learning disability in reading. And so you'll see that as well. So what happens is, in regards to providing those accommodations, either you have a private assessment done or an assessment done through the school system, and then they will actually review those findings with you through an IEP team. And at that point, they'll determine first if your child is eligible for services as it relates to very specific pieces in the state that you live in, as it relates to identifying students under the IDEA who might need an IEP. Once that happens, though, then the discussion can shift to what accommodations do we need so that the child can be successful. Sometimes you'll run into situations where your child is so smart and they have such strong coping mechanisms that maybe they're struggling, but they're struggling with a C or a D, and the school's like, well, they're not failing. But we also know they're not living up to their ability to do the work that they should be doing with the accommodations provided. So that's when you might want to look at, do you need an advocate? Do you need someone else at the table that can help explain those pieces to your school district? If the student does not qualify for an IEP, they may still be eligible for accommodations under what they call a Section 504. A Section 504 plan is under the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So that's another piece where a child could be covered for an accommodation, and it goes through a little bit different process as the IEP team process. So they're really separate processes, but at the same time, your child could be provided accommodations under either one of those, depending on what that learning profile looks like and what the recommendations are in your child's psychological examination that they had to determine if they were dyslexic or not, or do they have a learning challenge, right? And so if they've been diagnosed through that assessment, that comprehensive evaluation, then there will be recommendations listed in that as to what your child needs and what next steps would be. And that's some of the pieces that the school districts will look at to determine what, if any, accommodations your child needs. And then there may be some pieces that you decide to provide outside of the school as far as private tutoring and things like that. But if your child does qualify for a Section 504 plan or an IEP, then accommodations that are recommended by the IEP team can be provided to your dyslexic learner. Thanks for learning and listening today. And if you found this helpful, subscribe to the podcast and share this episode with your friends. If you are new to the journey of your child learning to read and remediating dyslexia, I would recommend going back and listening to episode 130, Understanding Your Child's Dyslexia Workshop. I'll put a link in the podcast description, and I'll also put a link to our weekly email resources that you can subscribe to learn more about dyslexia. Remember, you are not alone. You got this.